Social media post from the White House said today the president called the Chrisley family and said, quote, he will be granting full pardons, adding Trump knows best.
We can chalk this one up, I think, as Trump knows best. Remember this phrase, Trump knows best.
Trump knows best. That was a montage of Fox News talent just openly parroting what Trump was saying, given his recent pardon of the Chrisleys, a reality TV show people the pardon has been incredibly controversial. Though a Fox and Friends segment this morning really delighted in Trump's decision to pardon him. Mediaite founding editor Colby Hall. Joining me is editor-in-chief Aidan McLaughlin. Aidan, how are you?
I'm good, Colby. I am clearly not in as good a mood as you, given your hat after the Knicks loss to the Pacers.
Thick and thin. Through thick and thin.
We're going to put up 3 in a row. I can feel it.
All we got to do is get to Game 7. It can happen.
It can happen.
But I digress. So lots of controversy surrounding this. The Chrisleys, for those who don't know, hosted a reality show on USA Network. Their biggest crime, I think, is the quality of that reality show. It was one of the absolute worst things. It made Honey Boo Boo look like The Wire. It was so bad. Have you watched this show?
I've seen clips of it when they first got in trouble for fraud and tax evasion. There were some clips going around, and I watched some of it, and I was as off-put as you are, and it didn't surprise me at all that they were being convicted of fraud. But no, I have not watched a full episode, so I can't claim that.
So it's on USA Network, and I watch the Premier League, and occasionally a game will end. Won't pay attention, and then we'll come on, and I'll be like, "What is this awful, awful show?" Anywho, they were convicted for fraud and were sentenced to almost 20 years in prison. And they were found guilty, convicted, and they lost appeal. And their daughter, Savannah, became very MAGA and really did a public appeal to the MAGA set. And it seems as though now that Ed Martin, controversial figure, is now in charge of pardons, it appears that this isn't a justice move by Trump. It's just a taking care of those who have your back move. And it raises a lot of ethical questions about the transactional nature. Yes, it's a get out of jail free pass, but previous administrations, I guess up until Clinton did the Mark Rich thing, weren't so nakedly political and partisan about this sort of stuff.
Right. And I think the Mark Rich thing is a good example because that was enormously controversial for the Clinton administration. And yet now we have Trump issuing these pardons for very obvious, pure political reasons at such a rapid clip that it's dizzying and it's no longer controversial. And I think one of the reasons that he's able to do this, he's proven over, with the last election after, he was reelected with 77 million votes after, attempting to overturn the last election, January 6th, and everything that followed. He proved that there were very few political consequences that he could face. And now the only real political pitfall that he could run into is the midterm elections. And I do think that even though there's a sort of aura of invincibility around the Trump administration that has, that is true. I think there are very few political consequences for these things that Trump can do. These sorts of moves are still tremendously unpopular. The first example of them, of Trump basically pardoning people that were on his side and for no other reason, were the January 6th pardons.
100%.
When he pardoned a series of even violent rioters who were convicted of crimes that day.
Tasering cops.
Beating cops. 120 police officers badly wounded that day. 4 police officers in the months that followed killed themselves because of the events that day. And he pardoned pretty much all of the rioters that were convicted of any crimes in that. And that was tremendously unpopular. 83% of Americans in a poll taken in February disapproved of those pardons.
But that's not keeping him from doing this. And I would argue that the other pitfall that he faces, potentially, has not yet, is how conservative media react to this. And he's increasingly reliant on Fox News deciding to walk lockstep with these decisions. And, we saw the hours that followed this part of the Chrisley reality family, even conservative pro-Trump voices on other networks called it ridiculous. Like and so I found it very interesting to tune into Fox News to say, well, is this beyond the pale for Fox News opinion people? No, it is not. And this Fox and Friends segment, I think, is perfectly illustrative of how it doesn't really matter how controversial. So let's go to this Fox and Friends segment. This is how Lawrence Jones first introduced the segment on Wednesday morning.
Meanwhile, as it comes to the federal government, one of Donald Trump's campaign promises was to stop the weaponization of the feds when it comes to the FBI, these U.S. attorneys' offices as well. And one of the arguments that he made is that he wasn't the only one that was targeted. There has been overcharging going on with the feds. You got criminals running the street, and then you got people on tax charges that are serving 10 years. A lot of people don't feel like that's fair. Two of the folks were the Chrisley family. You know them from that reality TV show that they used to have.
Knows best.
Chrisley Knows Best.
All right, so, tying it to Trump's campaign promise that he was the victim of weaponization and that this was somehow a just move, that the Chrisley reality show hosts were also somehow victim of like this deep state. It's stunning, that argument, because it basically gives sucor or gravity to the idea that everything in the DOJ is corrupt. It really undermines, sort of the rule of law, so that, even if like the DOJ, the FBI, and the justice system are basically treated these two reality show hosts unfairly, it's absurd.
Right. I mean, this idea that the Chrisleys were targeted because of their support for Trump, and that, prosecutors used that to convict them of tax evasion and fraud, and then a judge was also in cahoots with the prosecutors and slapped down these convictions of, I think it was 20 years, up to 20 years in prison for one and up to 7 years for another, is absurd. And it reminds me of the Eric Adams case when Eric Adams was subject to this investigation for corruption, and I don't think anyone believes, except for maybe Eric Adams and his mother, that everything that he was doing was above board with the Turkish government. But Eric Adams restyled himself as a Trump supporter as soon as he saw that Trump was going to win the 2024 election, and contorted himself into this argument that because he was cracking down on immigration, undocumented immigration in New York, that he was being targeted by a deep state. And that was enough to convince Trump to shut down the investigation into him. And it was very successful for Eric Adams.
It's a very deep state. And I don't know that Trump was convinced so much. I think Trump makes these decisions purely based on political alliances. Like,
right.
I don't think the logic matters. It may matter. Maybe there was some convincing, like, oh yeah, that he was, sort of treated unfairly. I think mostly it's just transactional. And I think Savannah Chrisley, the daughter who really openly campaigned for Trump, this is just Trump saying, oh, you like me? I will do what I can to
help you out.
And apparently this reality show is very popular, and especially popular within the base. So I think it's purely kind of I can please the people that like me. And it's not even a logic thing. It's just
so what's crazy about this, and the fact that it's even more shocking to see hosts on Fox News defend it, is that this was probably the second most controversial pardon that Trump issued this week. The case that I've been following is the case of Paul Walczak, who is a nursing home executive who pleaded guilty to tax crimes right after the 2024 election. And they made an application for a pardon. His mother did. And his mother's this very wealthy nursing homes executive who has donated a lot of money to the Trump campaign.
Right.
And she made an appeal for a pardon, and the appeal focused on the fact that she had raised all this money for Trump. And she claimed, like the Chrisleys claimed, like Eric Adams claimed, that her son was persecuted because of their support for Donald Trump. The crazy part about this case is that it wasn't his pardon was sort of languishing as a bunch of other people were being pardoned. And it was only after his mother attended a $1 million a head fundraising dinner for Trump that he got this pardon. And
Wait. You're suggesting that the $1 million donation had something to do with the pardon?
I think it's very obvious that it does. But I think one thing that I really want to highlight here, because I think what gets lost in all of these debates and conversations about these kind of pardons is that you hear, oh, they're convicted of fraud or tax crimes or stuff. And very rarely do people actually pay attention to what they were convicted of. And often, you'll read a judge's decision or what prosecutors have alleged, and it's just the most egregious crimes imaginable.
That's a perfect setup for right now, because there's a clip here.
Yeah.
So first of all, Ainsley Earhart, co-host of Lawrence Jones, she reacted to Lawrence Jones in this manner that sort of framed the tone of this.
They were sentenced to a combined 19 years. You were going to say 12. According to this article, it's 19 years in prison. That's a long time for tax evasion.
Okay, you can see the pivot there. And to Brian Kilmeade's credit, he actually listed specifically what they were found guilty of and even lost in Court of Appeals.
7 for her, 12 for him, I thought. They were accused of submitting fraudulent documents, applying for bank loans. Julie, the wife, also allegedly submitted fake credit reports and bank statements while attempting to rent a house over in California. They were convicted in 22 of multiple crimes, including orchestrating a $30 million bank fraud and tax evasion.
They were accused of submitting fraudulent documents, applying for bank loans, fake credit reports, bank statement. Apparently, they bought a yacht because they were skimming money, and it was a $30 million bank fraud, of which they bought a yacht. And this earns you a pardon. I'm just shocked mostly that Fox News is doing sort of, I imagine if this were Hunter Biden or anyone close to the Biden, this would be understandably outraged. And, there would never be a pardon.
No. And I mean, the idea that this is anything close to draining the swamp. I mean, I'd understand if you were focusing on people who have less money and that are getting screwed by the justice system, fine. But these are extraordinarily wealthy reality TV stars that are getting bailed out for defrauding the United States government, and therefore us, the taxpayers. And just going back to the Walczak case, this guy who was pardoned after his mother spent $1 million on a dinner for Trump. His case involved between 2016 and 2019. I'm reading from the New York Times here. Prosecutors said that he withheld more than $10 million from the paychecks of the nurses, doctors, and others who worked at his facilities under the pretext of using it for their Social Security, Medicare, and federal income taxes. Instead, he used some of the money to buy a $2 million yacht and to pay for travel and purchases at high-end retailers, including Bergdorf Goodman and Cartier. So
sounds like he was targeted by the DOJ.
He's withholding money, $10 million, from the paychecks of nurses and doctors that worked at his facilities, and he used that money to buy a $2 million yacht and shopping sprees at Bergdorf Goodman and Cartier. I mean, this is as swampy and grotesque as it gets, and he was able to get away with it and avoid paying a $4.4 million fine because his mother gave Donald Trump's campaign $1 million.
Well, I think it's clear what the argument is here in that instance, and also the Chrisleys, is it's just a white collar crime. And no one would be so shameless as just to defend this because it's a white collar crime. And that's lesser. No one would do that. Oh, wait.
And they did it in front of, it's a very popular reality show. So it's definitely white collar crime.
White collar crime is like, I mean, I hate to be Malcolm X, but it just sounds so like you're like, oh, it's just a white collar crime. It's not that big. $30 million were stolen. $10 million were stolen by nurses. Like, I don't know how you equate that to immigrants, undocumented immigrants, or even like drug dealers, but that's an enormous crime from which, these people were sentenced to a lot of time in prison because of the scale of their fraud.
Right. And if Fox News and Trump supporters want to argue that the enormously wealthy should be allowed to steal money from American taxpayers, that's a different discussion. I don't think any of them would agree with that. So the idea that we're just going along and accepting Trump pardoning these people purely because they support him is mind-boggling. And I suspect that a lot of people that support Trump would make the argument, that they were targeted. But we all know that isn't true.
Well, I think Trump has long played loose and fast with tax evaluations, and he's sort of been found guilty for fraudulent forms he insists was, targeting by the DOJ. I think he presents a much kinder, gentler point of view towards white-collar crime, and instead wants to focus on the illegals, as he says, or undocumented people, or those who don't have the power to defend themselves, while as those who sort of can pay the legal fees and sort of do right by MAGA, they'll get rewarded. And I think that's what this is, and I think that's kind of like the kleptocracy and the lack. That's the authoritarianism that people warned about that we're seeing in full view. That I said this on TV today. Like, no one seems to care.
Well, I think that's the biggest factor here that I think is fueling this stuff. And as I said at the top, Donald Trump no longer fears political consequences.
Right.
He used to, in his first term, when you would speak to White House officials or people that worked in the administration, or when I would speak on my show to cabinet officials who had served in his administration, he cared a great deal about the traditional media. As much as he attacked it, he read the New York Times, he read the New York Post, he read the Wall Street Journal, he watched CNN, he watched MSNBC, he watched Fox News. And he took it very seriously when they would criticize him. And when they criticized him in unison, sometimes he would lash out and say, I don't care about the fake news media. But he really did temper some of his more extreme positions as a response to what they were saying about them.
He wants to be liked, and so he would moderate so that he could be liked by even those who were opposed to him.
And I still think he consumes that media, but I think he no longer cares what they say half as much. And two, the people around him, his cabinet, White House officials, a lot of them are true believers now. And so I
call it the bubble of sycophancy. He doesn't have anyone around him to say, like, bro,
don't do that.
Ixnay, you don't sound so smart when you're talking about 51st state Canada. Like this, you sound crazy.
I mean, the famous story in the first term is when I think it was Gary Cohn snatched tariff papers off Trump's desk because he feared that Trump would go off and start a trade war. Clearly, that's not happening in this administration anymore. So, yeah, I think the bad ideas, the brazen corruption, and the self-dealing is he doesn't see there to be political consequences for it.
Right.
And he's probably right about that. Unless this stuff just hacks away at his sort of the perception that he is draining the swamp so much that by the time the midterms comes around, the Republican Party just takes such a brutal beating that the Trump administration realizes that there are, in fact, consequences.
Well, I think that's inevitable unless things change. But back to that feedback loop, the co-hosts at Fox and Friends, they know precisely that their only real viewer that matters is Trump. And so they speak directly to him. And so one of the codas to this segment is Ainsley Earhart defending this pardon to the Chrisleys. Let's just watch this last clip.
Right. They've been serving for 2.5 years already. It was January 2 years ago, so almost 2.5 years. And their daughter, Savannah's been fighting for them. She said on social media that she's raising all of the kids. If you watch that show, it's a cute family about faith and trying to do the right thing, and takes you through several moves in their house and Savannah going to college and things like that.
So a family about faith and trying to do the right thing is the most generous portrayal of people that were found guilty of skimming $30 million in tax fraud and buying a yacht. That's not, I don't know, like it's sort of like, that's not faith. That's not the thing. It's terrible, but it doesn't matter what's really true.
I was raised Catholic, Colby. I do not recall a priest ever telling me that I should steal $30 million and buy a yacht.
You're the wrong priest.
Yeah, apparently.
You were in the wrong prefect.
I got to call up the Chrisleys, ask them where they go to church.
Yeah, the last bit here is Brian Kilmeade pivots to another celebrity pardon, P. Diddy's possible pardon. Let's watch.
And guess what? There's a big push now on the president to pardon P. Diddy. And among
It's a different crime.
Right.
Those are completely
believe
different
me,
crimes.
I don't think anyone seeing the trial would be like, this is not really up the president's alley. Unlike this white-collar crime, I'm looking at what's some of the color on that trial is pretty unbelievable.
I don't know. Another white-collar crime. Kill Me There seems to suggest that P. Diddy won't get a pardon because the color on reveal is pretty unbelievable. And it's not a white-collar crime like the Chrisleys, who are wonder bread. Like, they are middle American. And so the subtext and the language choice there is pretty apparent.
I mean, here's a question, though. If Diddy started going full MAGA,
Smartest movie to make.
Do you think that Trump would at least signal an openness to pardoning him?
Well, I think he would get closer, but look at Derek Chauvin. His crew really he went MAGA. Yep. And I think Derek Chauvin was the guy who was convicted for killing George Floyd. He was a bridge too far for even Stephen Miller, which is, I think, so
shocking.
Right? Yeah, I think P. Diddy is probably, if P. Diddy was, a different person, a different demographic, then yeah, I think that would work. But P. Diddy, also the story surrounding P. Diddy and the baby oil
it's about as grotesque as it gets. So let's hope that
Aidan.
doesn't work.
That was good stuff.
Great talking to you, Colby. Thanks.
Let me just quickly remind people, click the like button and subscribe for more videos like this. I'm Colby Hall. You are
Aidan McLaughlin.
Keep watching. Stay strong. Go Knicks.
Go Knicks.